Hello there, and welcome to the weekly Outside Views magazine on politics in Asia and Oceania. In Japan, consumer prices have risen at their highest rate in more than 40 years. The inflation rate for consumer goods, excluding fresh food, rose by 3.7% in November compared to the previous year. That's what the government said in Tokyo on Friday. This is the strongest increase since 1981. On average, experts had expected the core inflation rate to rise by this magnitude. This is the eighth time in a row that core inflation has exceeded the 2% mark targeted by the Japanese central bank, or the BOJ. The inflation rate for consumer goods, excluding the strongly fluctuating components of fresh food and energy, was 2.8%, and experts took this as another sign of strong underlying price pressure. Including the prices for fresh food and energy, the inflation rate was 3.8%. All three values were thus above the increase in October. The data is fueling speculation that the Bank of Japan may soon take further action following this week's surprise change of strategy. The Bank of Japan surprised financial markets on Tuesday by announcing an easing of the long-term bond yield range. This was seen as the first step towards tightening monetary policy. Before that, the Japanese central bank had always emphasized that it was the only major central bank in the world to maintain its strategy of extremely loose monetary policy and support for domestic demand. The BOJ stuck to its program of keeping borrowing costs at an all-time low. However, it decided to allow 10-year Japanese government bond yields between minus 0.5% and plus 0.5%. That's above the current range of minus 0.25% and plus 0.25%. And meanwhile, real wages in Japan have been falling for 7 straight months. Central Bank Governor Haruhiko Kuroda has repeatedly described this as worrying. Attention is now turning to the outcome of the upcoming annual spring wage negotiations, which are due just weeks before Kuroda's resignation in April. Experts are now expecting some increase in wages given the recent price increases and the relatively strong business performance of Japanese companies this year, which has benefited from the weaker yen. There is a possibility that the Bank of Japan will take further action depending on how basic wage negotiations go, said economist Koya Miyame of analyst firm SMBC Nikko. China held military maneuvers near Taiwan on Sunday. A spokesman for the People's Army said these were a response to provocations by the United States and Taiwan, which were doing a common cause. Beijing did not say where exactly the military exercise took place and how many aircraft were in use. The People's Liberation Army has organized joint combat readiness patrols and offensive drills on the water and in the air around the island of Taiwan, the army spokesman said. It would be a robust response to increasing collusion and provocation by the United States and Taiwanese authorities. The Chinese army released a photo of a bomber, a warship, and an aerial photo taken from a cockpit showing a mountain range in Taiwan. The latter was intended to emphasize how close the plane came to the Taiwanese coast. China's foreign ministry announced on Saturday its strong rejection of a $10 billion military aid package for Taiwan agreed in Washington, which would also include arms deliveries. The visit of senior U.S. politician Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan in August heightened the tensions between the U.S. and China. The People's Army then held the largest military maneuvers in its history in the waters around Taiwan. Since the split between China and Taiwan in 1949, Beijing has viewed the island as a breakaway territory that it wants to reunite with the mainland, if necessary, using military force. China has increased military, diplomatic, and economic pressure on the island nation, and Beijing opposes any diplomacy that might lend legitimacy to Taiwan and has responded with increasing anger to visits by Western officials and politicians. A ban on women working in non-governmental organizations or NGOs in Afghanistan has sparked international concern. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was deeply concerned about the alleged order by the radical Islamic Taliban. That's what his spokesman Stéphane Dujarric said in New York on Sunday. This decision will undermine the work of numerous organizations across the country that help the most vulnerable, especially women and girls, they say. The United Nations and its partners, including national and international NGOs, are currently assisting more than 28 million Afghans who depend on humanitarian aid for their survival. The UN Secretary General once again emphasizes the right of all women to be part of the working population and thus contribute to the common good, the spokesman said. And the Afghan Ministry of Economics had written in a letter demanding that all employees of all national and international NGOs be suspended from their work until further notice. The reason for this is that the women did not comply with the regulations of the Taliban leadership with regard to wearing a hijab, that means a headscarf. If an organization does not comply with this order, its license will be revoked, the letter said. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken expressed deeply concerns on Twitter. This ban on women will disrupt the delivery of humanitarian aid in Afghanistan. Women play a central role in humanitarian relief efforts around the world, said Blinken. Such a decision could have devastating consequences for the people of Afghanistan. The UN said it would ask the Taliban for an explanation of the order. A meeting of high-ranking UN officials with representatives of dozens of NGOs was planned for Sunday to discuss how to proceed in Afghanistan. From NGO circles, it was said that the meeting would discuss whether to stop all aid measures in the country. The European Union strongly condemns the recent ban by the Taliban. That's what the EU Commission spokeswoman Nabila Masrali tweeted on Sunday night. It's a clear breach of humanitarian principles. The EU is currently assessing the impact the ban will have on its aid to Afghanistan. In response to the Taliban's call for a ban on women working in NGOs, several aid organizations in the country shut down their work. According to a media report, 3 Japanese financial institutions will soon stop insuring ships against war damage in all Russian waters. The 3 insurance companies Tokyo Marine and Nishido Fire Insurance, Sompo Japan Insurance and Mitsui Sumitomo Insurance have started to inform shipping companies about their decision. That was reported by the Japanese financial newspaper Nikkei Asia. Accordingly, as of January 1st, they will no longer cover damage resulting from the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. This applies to all Russian waters, no matter how far from the war. Without additional security, operating ships in Russian waters would become too risky for most operators. This could also affect Japan's imports of natural gas, which comes from the Russian Far East island of Sakhalin, it said. North Korea has fired at least one potentially nuclear-capable missile, according to the South Korean military. The missile flew in the direction of the Sea of Japan. That's what the General Staff in Seoul announced on Friday. It was a ballistic missile. Further details were initially unknown. UN resolutions ban North Korea from testing ballistic missiles. Depending on the design, these can be equipped with a nuclear warhead. The conflict on the Korean peninsula has become significantly more explosive in recent months. North Korea's military is testing missiles at increased frequency. The United States and South Korea resumed full-scale joint military exercises this year as well because of this. Google wants to take action against an order by the Indian Competition Authority, which imposed a fine of millions on the group. The company therefore wants to lodge a complaint with an Indian court, that was said by a Google spokesman to the German press agency on Friday. The competition watchdog's decision is a major step backwards for Indian users and businesses who trust Android security features and could potentially drive up the cost of mobile services and devices, Google said. The competition authorities fined the company with 13.37 billion rupees, that's 165 million euros, in October. The Competition Commission accused Google of abusing the dominant role of its Android operating system to boost its core online search business. It was said that with the pre-installed Google apps, Android users would be encouraged to use Google search. The Competition Commission instructed Google to make changes, including the ability to uninstall Google apps. A few days later, the Competition Commission also imposed a fine of 9.36 billion rupees, that's 115 million euros, on the company. They accused the company of abusing the Play Store's dominant role by forcing developers to use Google's payment system for app and in-app purchases. India, which will soon officially be the most populous country in the world, is an interesting growth market for Google and other Silicon Valley companies. Android phones are very popular in India. In the massive wave of infections in China, according to officially unconfirmed internal estimates, 248 million people, or 18% of the population, were infected with corona in the first 3 weeks of December. Accordingly, 37 million people are likely to have been infected on Tuesday of this week alone, according to notes from a meeting of the National Health Commission in Beijing on Wednesday, which circulated on social media. People involved in the discussion confirmed the information provided by the Bloomberg news agency and the Financial Times. The estimates come from the Vice Director of the Health Department, Sun Yang, as reported by the Financial Times. According to him, the virus continues to spread rapidly among billions of people. More than half of the 81 million residents of southwest China's Sichuan province, or the 21 million in the capital Beijing, are infected. The official statistics for the 3 weeks of December mentioned only 62,000 infections nationwide. Yeah, very credible. While hospitals are overcrowded and many crematoria can no longer cremate the corpses quickly enough, the official figures no longer provide an overview of the true extent of the wave of infections. According to expert projections, hundreds of thousands of deaths are to be expected. The notes from the discussion, however, do not address the number of deaths, only infections. After almost 3 years of lockdowns, forced quarantines and mass testing, the most populous country abruptly lifted its tough zero-COVID policy on December 7th. The reason for the U-turn was that the infections with the new Omicron variants were no longer as severe. But experts saw the reason above all in the fact that the strict measures could no longer be maintained in view of the explosive spread. The restrictions had also placed an increasing burden on the second largest economy. After Chinese experts used the warn of the dangers of the coronavirus to justify the zero-COVID policy, the severity of the disease has been downplayed since the change of course. Leading government advisor and renowned epidemiologist Chong Nanshan even suggested calling COVID-19 just the corona cold. And that concludes this week's magazine on Asia and Oceania, but tomorrow you'll get another one and I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.